Tariffs and Trump, wind-powered ships gaining ground, and the image of shipping and seafaring. Hi, it's Marcus Hand, editor of Seatrade Maritime News here, with our November news roundup, Maritime in Minutes. And I'm joined by our correspondent, Gary Howard. We'll be discussing the shipping news stories that stood out for us over the last month. Must be said, I'm not quite sure how we're at the end of November already, but we've got plenty to talk about from the last month, so we'll jump right into it. Gary, how did you start off November in Maritime?
Thanks, Marcus. We're going to kick off with some tariffs, but we're not talking about the US, as this story is from our China correspondent, Catherine C., and was published on the 1st of November, before we knew who would be taking up residence in the White House. The European Union imposed duties on the import of Chinese electric vehicles, or EVs, ranging from 7.8% on Teslas through to 35.3% for SAIC vehicles. That's formerly Shanghai Automotive Industry Corporation. That same 35.3% duty will also be placed on other non-cooperating EV manufacturers as well. Import tariffs have since become pretty big news in the weeks since the story broke, as US President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to impose tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China. He said 25% tariffs will be imposed on goods from Mexico and Canada, while tariffs on Chinese goods will be hiked by 10% when he takes office in January. The measures are intended to protect American jobs and narrow the US trade deficit, and though the president has also said they will remain in place until illegal immigration and drug trafficking from its neighbours falls. The EU import tariffs seem more measured, coming as a result of an investigation into cheap EV imports from China that was announced in September 2023, and China and the EU have said they will work towards finding alternatives to those tariffs. Marcus, what have you got for week one?
Yeah, sort of staying over in North America, which we're partly covering there, and I'm looking at dock worker strikes, which never seem to be far away in that part of the world. Mainly over issues of pay and port automation, which are proving highly contentious. On the west coast of Canada, the country's largest port was shut down in early November, as first the Foremen's Union went on strike over a long-running dispute with DP World, and then employers across British Columbia container terminals responded by locking out all dock workers, saying strike action could easily escalate to all-out action at any moment, so they were opting to shut down ports safely. This was seen by the unions as a ploy to get the federal government to intervene with binding arbitration. And indeed, they may have had a point, because a bit over a week later, the government did step in and mandated that both sides go to binding arbitration overseen by the country's Labour Relations Board. Meanwhile, the tentative agreement that was struck between dock worker unions and employers on the US East Coast ports in early October began to look increasingly tentative and rather less like an actual agreement. 4 days of talks lasted just 2 days before the unions walked out, saying employers were trying to introduce semi-automation. It now looks increasingly likely the unions could strike again on 15 January, the deadline to reach a full agreement on a 6-year master contract, which expired at the end of September. If such a scenario does take shape, all eyes will be on how incoming President Trump responds, as he comes into office 5 days later on the 20th of January.
It wouldn't be Maritime Minutes without me banging on about wind propulsion for a bit, and November's pick is the announcement from Bound for Blue that it has secured an order to install its sails on a fleet of 5 MRs from Maersk Tankers. The product carriers will each have 4 26-metre E-sails installed, a measure the companies expect to bring double-digit fuel savings. Signing Maersk Tankers will be big news to Bound for Blue, not because they lack orders, but because of the value they place specifically on having big names in shipping invest in their technology. The Spanish firm hosted some maritime journalists in London in October, and I was there. They told us this is a deliberate choice on their part. They caught the leading companies in shipping, and the strategy has already started paying off, they said, as one owner booked sales for one of its vessels solely based on the actions of another high-profile brand in their sector who had chosen Bound for Blue. These Maersk tankers getting the sails are all 2015 and 2016 built, and they'll have the sails installed in 2025 and 2026. We have plenty of other news of wind propulsion orders from other manufacturers, of factory openings and deal signings. If you go to Seatrade Maritime News, go across to sustainability in the top navigation bar, and you'll see wind-powered ships there, and you'll find all the latest.
Excellent. Actually, what I'm going to be talking about for the second week in November, which was Seatrade Maritime Crew Connect Global in Manila, I actually chaired a panel on wind-powered shipping as it happens, and its impact in terms of crewing and regulation and stuff like that, which was really quite interesting. So yes, the second week of November saw me heading off to Manila for an event I always enjoy, and that was the aforementioned Seatrade Maritime Crew Connect Global. There were 3 days of discussion that covered a wide range of topics, including training, wind-powered ships, DEI, mental health and wellness, and a lively parliamentary debate on the impact of AI on the crewing sector. A recurring issue that came up in multiple sessions was the image of the industry and how this impacts the ability of young people wanting to join it. For the second year running, conference chair Tommy Olofsson took a poll of the audience to see if they would encourage their children to go to sea. And for the second year running, the majority said they wouldn't. It's not the greatest recommendation for the industry, it must be said. As is often noted, the fact the industry is largely invisible unless something bad happens was highlighted in terms of its image or lack thereof. For example, this year we have had the Red Sea crisis and the collision with the Baltimore Bridge and the subsequent collapse. When it comes to the image of the industry, there appear to be 2 schools of thought. One, that we focus too much on the negatives, such as bullying and harassment, and should be better at presenting the positives of the sector. And another was that we need to be honest, that it's a tough job being a seafarer. But there are people who want to do tough jobs if they have the right leadership and support. I took a more in-depth look at this in the article, Improving the Image of Seafaring, Putting Lipstick on a Pig. The latter part of that is actually a quote from somebody at the conference. So check that out. The link will be in the show notes. I will also just give a quick shout out to IMO Goodwill Ambassador George Hoyt and the fantastic work the Adopt a Ship program do in bringing shipping into the classroom in primary schools in the Philippines. We have a video interview with George coming up, so keep an eye out for that. If you're enjoying the Seatrade Maritime podcast, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on the app of your choice. Gary, over to week 3 for you, and I believe an anniversary we'd rather not have.
Yeah, I'm not going to be doing anything great for the image of shipping, I'm afraid. It was a solemn anniversary that passed in November 2024 as we marked 1 year since Galaxy Leader was hijacked by the Houthis, accelerating the crisis at the Red Sea. In the days before that November 19 anniversary, there were 2 attacks on a ship in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, as the vessel reported missiles landing in the sea close to the vessel on 2 separate occasions. Thankfully, the ship and its crew were reported safe with no damage sustained, and it continued on its way. Galaxy Leader was attacked and captured by hijackers who boarded the ship by helicopter. I think we've all seen those images in the video that was released by the Houthis showing the helicopter landing and the hijackers advancing across the deck with automatic weapons drawn and taking the bridge, holding the crew there at gunpoint. The crew of 25 seafarers from the Philippines, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Mexico and Romania have been held hostage in Yemen since. 2 of the crew contracted malaria in captivity, but have since recovered after the Houthis allowed them to access medical support, according to, I think it was from the Philippines government, that report. There's no need to cover all of the impacts on world trade since the hijacking, but from November 19, 2023 to November 16, 2024, there have been 108 incidents in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, which have led to the death of 4 seafarers and 2 sustaining severe injuries. Galaxy Leader is one of 4 hijackings as well. Not really much more to say, really, except let's hope we're not reporting on bigger numbers around this time next year.
Indeed, although there doesn't also seem to be any particular end in sight, and I don't get the impression that anyone is expecting a change in the near future, unfortunately. I'm going to take a look at something rather different, and that is green corridors, which are seen as a vital way of advancing decarbonisation in shipping. Now, green corridor signings and announcements have become a bit like AIPs, or approval in principle for ship designs, in that there are lots of them, but it's rather less clear how many will progress much beyond smiling executives holding up signed documents and photos sent to the press and then posted proudly on LinkedIn. Paul Bartlett reported on the latest Green Corridor update from the Getting to Zero Coalition and the Global Maritime Forum. which warned that many of the planned developments were facing what it described as a feasibility wall. In the last 12 months, there have been some 18 new green corridors announced, but a lack of support from governments was seen as the number one bottleneck. It was noted a handful of green corridors were setting the pace and advancing, but progress was not inevitable. A number of recommendations were made, including government support to bridge the operational cost gap, development of innovative commercial agreements, and flexible programmatic approach to governance. The report's authors warned that if green corridors fail to develop, the target of reaching 5% usage of zero-emission fuels by 2030 would be at risk.
Yeah, just yesterday I read up a story about Rotterdam, Singapore, their green and digital shipping corridor. They've chucked something else in there as well, on them conducting a pilot on the bunkering of essentially bio-LNG. There's a lot of work coming out of Rotterdam, Singapore for sure.
Well, that is one that does have that government support, I think, that they are talking about in that report. But I think it's some of the other, many other initiatives that they're more concerned about.
Absolutely. On to the final week then, and staying on a green theme, Northern Lights announced its first tanker, Northern Pioneer, is ready for service as Dalian Shipbuilding Industry Company has completed the first of the 2 ships it has on order from the carbon capture outfit. Northern Lights is an endpoint for captured CO2 and will pump the captured carbon into an underground reservoir, locking away the greenhouse gas away from the environment. The joint venture is between Equinor, Total Energies and Shell, and announced that its terminal was complete in September, ready to receive around 1.5 million tonnes of CO2 each year, and they've got plans in place to expand capacity to 5 million tonnes a year. Its ships are the next obvious major component in the CO2 supply chain, and there are 4 7,500 cubic metre liquefied CO2 tankers that will be operated by K-Line, shuttling CO2 from Norwegian and European sites to the Northern Lights for disposal. The ships themselves will be LNG powered and come fitted with Norse power rotor sails and an air lubrication system to minimise their own environmental impact, so it doesn't sound like they're sparing too much on those ships. For me, this is a really important project for carbon capture. It adds another outlet for captured CO2 on top of its use in chemical and industrial processes. And sometimes you do see the excuse that carbon capture isn't worth it because there's nowhere for the CO2 to go or be used. So the more we can erode away at that excuse, the better, in my book. Marcus, I'll leave you to see us out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with your last statement there. So moving to the last week of November, and that for me was the last sort of hurrah for events. Included in that, I moderated a panel at the International Marine Purchasers Association Singapore conference and learned just how incredibly complex sustainability and complying with European Scope 3 regulations will be for that particular niche of the industry. If I thought FuelEU Maritime was complicated, this, given the number of different suppliers and so forth involved, is absolutely mind-boggling. But I'm actually going to focus on TOC Asia, an event that was put on the same time by our colleagues from TOC within Informa Markets. A ports and terminal event, TOC Asia has multiple conference tracks and always includes an excellent markets segment. A number of well-known analysts attempted to forecast where the container shipping market is headed, which is no easy task. They also got it completely wrong last year, as was noted, because no one predicted the Red Sea crisis, obviously. But moving on to that session, Alan Murphy, CEO and founder of Sea Intelligence, took a dive into the changing world of alliances, with MSC going it alone, Hapag-Lloyd and Maersk coming together as the Gemini Corporation, and the new Premier Alliance. The Gemini Corporation's stated aim of 90% schedule reliability based around a network of major hubs has drawn a lot of questions, especially given most lines currently struggle to reach 50% schedule reliability. With more transshipment and less direct port-to-port pairs, the Gemini Corporation will have longer transit times than its competitors. But its counter apparently is that its services will be on time, while the others will be 3 days late. Murphy explained that Sea Intelligence undertook a comparison based on all the other lines being late with 2024 reliability type numbers and assuming Gemini would be on time all of the time, to see if Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd would become the most competitive when it comes to transit times in such a scenario. This is what he had to say. It does improve their relative position a bit, but they don't become the fastest. Far from it. So, that is one of the challenges they're going to face, is even if they deliver a more reliable product, they will have less connections and they will be slower. So will transit time or reliability win out? Well, if you believe Datuk Ruben Amir Ganalingam, head of Malaysian Terminal Westports, speaking at a sustainability panel the following day, it's just going to all be about price. He said shippers don't care about service and only pretend to care about delivery times, but they do really care about price. We will see what happens. And on that note, that's all we have time for in this episode. If you want to learn more about all the stories featured during this episode, links are in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to joining you on the next episode of the Seatrade Maritime Podcast.